Hello everyone, and welcome to Sunup. I'm Lyndall Stout. We begin today getting up to speed on agricultural policy as we start off the new year. Extension Ag Policy Specialist Amy Hagerman starts off the conversation talking about COVID relief.
So just before Christmas, we had the general appropriations bill, just the annual appropriations bill pass that actually included the COVID relief elements inside of it. So it's called the Consolidated Appropriations Act of 2021. How that's different from the CARES Act that we've been talking about since March of 2020 is that the CARES Act was a standalone package for COVID relief. This is actually folded in with all of the other funding for the federal agencies for the 2021 fiscal year. People have already started seeing the effects. The stimulus payment has already made it into a lot of people's checking accounts. That was included in that Consolidated Appropriations Act. And there will be other elements that begin to come out across time that were part of that package.
Let's talk about agriculture more specifically. What do we know about the funding levels and any details that you might have at this point?
Yeah, so actually $13 billion was set aside for agricultural programs in that bill. Most of this is going to go into actually recharging the Commodity Credit Corps, the CCC fund. The CCC, if you'll recall, is what we do a lot of our disaster program payments out of, whether that's for hurricanes back in 2018, 2019, or our annual crop disaster programs that we see. So $13 billion in CCC recharge. We already know that $1.5 billion is going to be spent on food purchases. This is a great way to connect some additional purchasing power for our farmers, for their commodities, and those products are actually put into food boxes that go to hungry families and actually meet that connection of the two needs during COVID times.
So what do we know so far about how the money will be divided up? And I'm sure patience is the key as we change administrations.
Absolutely. We don't really know what the timing is going to be in terms of how these payments are going to come out or even what they will look like. Certainly there's been a lot of discussion. So while we don't have a lot of details, it looks like there may be some additional funds for agricultural producers, but it may build off of the CFAP2 program. We're waiting for USDA to make their announcement, and of course, they're looking at the administrative transition right now as well.
Okay, well, keep us posted. Thanks a lot, Amy.
Thank you.
Wesley, and welcome to the Mesonet Weather Report. We are in the time of year when rainfall events are usually few and far between. This past week was no exception. The 5-day rainfall map from Wednesday shows that there was very little moisture received. Some of the larger totals, like the 2900s at Goodwell, came primarily with snowmelt. One of the best things about snow moisture is that almost all of it makes its way into the soil profile as it slowly melts. This map is a shallow fractional water index map from 2 inches. Notice the very good dark green 0.8 to 1 in the main part of the state. 1 is as wet and 0 is as dry as the sensor can read. In the Panhandle, we see good numbers in Beaver and Texas counties due to the recent snows. There were no readings at this date and time in Cimarron County due to soil temperatures that were colder than the 34 degrees that the moisture sensor can operate in. At the deeper depth of 24 inches, we still have some drier soils and hence the drought declaration holding on in these areas. The dark red colors at Boise City, Goodwell, and downstate at Eric and Elk City indicate moisture levels at or below the ability of the sensors to pick up. Gary is up next with a look at total rainfall since October.
Thanks, Wes, and good morning, everyone. Well, now after all that excitement from December and January, early January, We've now settled into a much more boring weather pattern, more typical of the season for Oklahoma. Longer stretches of lots of sun, seasonable temperatures, and occasional cold fronts. But we do have some changes in the drought monitor to look at, so let's get right to that. We have gotten rid of most of the extreme drought. That's the D3, the red area. We have whittled away at much of that extreme drought area in the red, the D3. We do still have areas of moderate to severe drought across the far southwest and the western panhandle. Abnormally dry conditions in south central Oklahoma, but overall things have gotten better over the last couple of months instead of getting worse, which we feared. Now, if we go back to October 1st, the beginning of the water year runs from October 1st through September 30th of the following year. We do see increased rainfall amounts across northeastern and east central, southeast Oklahoma. That's to be expected. A little stranger area of lower amounts in south central Oklahoma. We can see that on the departure from normal rainfall map from the same time frame. We do see that deficit there, 7.1 inches in south central Oklahoma and bordering on southeastern Oklahoma, but a wider area in that region from 2 to 4 inches below normal. And of course we see the lower amounts, the deficits over across far southwest Oklahoma and the western panhandle. We do have surpluses, however, in north central, northeast Oklahoma, and up in northwest Oklahoma, thanks to all those generous rains and snows during December. So we are in a much better position than we were coming into the fall and winter. Let's hope that we can get some more precipitation events in here and set us up for a much nicer spring. That's it for this time. We'll see you next time on the Mesonet Weather Report.
We're already a few weeks into 2021, so Daryl, how does cattle numbers and beef supply look?
Well, we're trying to figure out where we are exactly with the longer-term cattle cycle numbers. USDA will be giving us the annual cattle inventory report at the end of January, but it looks like cattle numbers continue to get a little bit smaller. They were a little bit smaller in 2020 compared to 2019, which was the peak. So that means that probably we're going to see a little bit tighter supplies as we go through the year. We're starting the year with feedlot inventories about equal to last year, but as we move through the year, we should see that tighten up a little bit as we sort of use up the feeder cattle in the pipeline. And beef production is expected to be down somewhere between 1% and 2% probably in 2021.
A few weeks ago when we talked, you were talking about beef demand in 2020, and it was surprising that demand held pretty strong. So how does demand look for 2021?
Well, again, given that basis, we still got a lot of challenges. Obviously, the pandemic is not controlled yet. We still have the issues with the food service side being restricted. A lot of the emphasis is still on the retail grocery side. All of that said, beef demand has held up pretty well under those circumstances, and so at this point in time, we don't see that changing very much. And obviously, as we go through the year and hopefully get the pandemic under control, then we see a little bit more typical kind of balance between the food service and the retail grocery sector.
So are there any other important factors that are going to play a role in 2021 in regards to the cattle markets?
There's a couple of things we're watching right now. Probably the biggest one is, of course, the fact that grain prices have increased so much in the last part of 2020 with strong export demand, and so feed costs are going to be higher. That's going to affect feedlot ration cost in particular, feedlot cost of gain. That has implications for the feeder cattle market. And it'll affect other sectors as well to some extent. So we'll be watching that. And of course, we've got widespread drought in parts of the country, which it's not really an issue right now in winter time, but if this persists on into the spring and into the growing season, then we could have some real issues with the drought impacts on forage production and potentially impact cattle markets.
So, going forward, and, again, it's really hard to, speculate on what cattle prices are going to be like given all the factors you just mentioned, but what do you anticipate?
Well, at this point in time, I guess I would say cautiously optimistic that we see a little bit of improvement in cattle prices on an annual average basis. Not a huge amount, probably 5 to 10%, somewhere in that range at this point. I do think that, it may be kind of a tale of two halves of the year. I think we're going to continue to struggle a little bit here through the first part of the year, trying to get things under control, get the vaccinations in place, and sort of get the economy hopefully back on a little bit more typical track. The second half of the year, if we're successful in that, we could see some, some additional strength in that market, but probably modestly higher prices on an annual average basis.
Well, that's how I like my kosh, with a little bit of optimism sprinkled in there. All right, thanks, Daryl. Dr. Daryl Peel, Livestock Marketing Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
As we get closer and closer to the spring calving season, we'll be talking here on the Cow-Calf Corner about different aspects of working with cows and heifers at calving time to try to ensure the best outcome for both the cow and the calf. Today, I'd really like to emphasize the impact that a difficult birth can have, not just on the calf, but on the mother cow. There's been several research trials done through the years that have looked at the impact of a prolonged delivery or difficult birth on how long it takes that cow to recycle to have a chance to rebreed for the next year's calf crop. And the impact is really quite substantial. The work done at the USDA station in Miles City, Montana back in 1984 took a good look at what happens with 2-year-olds if they get assistance in a short period of time after the start of the delivery of the calf, or if they have the calf unassisted in a very timely manner, compared to those that were allowed to stay in labor for 2 hours or longer and then finally provided assistance. And so if you look at this particular graphic that's on the screen, what you're seeing is a comparison between heifers that got either early assistance, had the calf easily, or those that they allowed to wait for 2 hours or longer. That's the early versus the late. They're looking at the percent of those heifers that were cycling at the start of the next breeding season. And if you'll notice that those that were early, that 17% more of them were cycling than their counterparts that were allowed to go through a prolonged delivery process. Perhaps even more important, the pregnancy percentage after the breeding season was over was 20% lower in those that had that prolonged, very, very hard delivery process. Also, I think we want to remember that some of those cows that had that difficult birth that did eventually rebreed as they followed them on through, this particular data set indicated their calves were, of course, lighter. They weighed 46 pounds less at weaning time. So there again is another of those hidden costs that showed up just because that heifer had a difficult birth at calving time. What to do about it? Well, I think we want to properly develop replacement heifers to make sure that they're in about that body condition score 6 that we've talked about in the past, that they've been bred to calving ease bulls, to reduce the incidence of calving difficulty whenever possible, and that way minimize that situation where this heifer has that prolonged delivery that could cost her days in terms of when she's going to recycle to rebreed, or could have an impact on rebreeding percentage or even the weaning weight of that eventual calf. Keep that in mind as you go through this calving season, and we look forward to visiting with you again next week on Sunup's Cow-Calf Corner.
You may or may not be aware that the FDA has had a pet food recall. Now the problem with these pet food is that there are aflatoxins in it. Now aflatoxins are made by Aspergillus flavus. We find it in corn and other grains that we use for pet foods. This can be toxic to dogs if the quantities are large enough. Symptoms that pets may have if they have this toxicity would be sluggish. They usually don't want to eat. There may be some vomiting and or diarrhea, and you may see some jaundice. You may see some yellow tint to their eyes, and this is due to the liver damage that is caused by these toxins. If your pet is displaying any of these signs, you need to contact your veterinarian and consult with him or her. Sometimes certain pet foods may not agree with your pets. You may have to spend some time selecting what's best for your pet. Then on occasions, we do have some problems with certain pet foods. The FDA alerts us that there are some issues, maybe toxins or other problems with those pet foods that pet owners need to be aware of. Pet food recalls are unusual and rare. We don't normally have problems with the products that we feed our pets. It's just on occasion there can be some maybe something that unusual happens with these pet foods. When there is a problem with pet foods, the FDA will list those products on their website. If you would like a link to the current recall, just go to sunup.okstate.edu.
Well, we're both feet into 2021. Kim, let's just dive in. Where are we with any big news in agriculture?
Well, I think the big news this last week is out of Russia. You go about 4 weeks ago, they announced that they were going to put an export tax on their wheat of about 25 euros. That's about $30 a metric ton, or around 82 cents in U.S. prices. They announced this last week that they may increase that to 50 euros. That's $60 a ton, or $1.65 for U.S. wheat prices. Of course, the WASDE came out this week. There's some surprises in there and some good price movements. And then the winter seedings report came out. Oklahoma wheat per planted acres up about 1%. Higher all winter wheat acres were up, and hard red winter wheat acres were up 4 or 5%.
Well, let's dive in first to the WASDE. You mentioned there were some big changes in there.
Well, not for wheat. There wasn't, I mean, they lowered wheat a little bit, you know, from 28.7 billion bushels to 28.4 worldwide. Ending stocks from 11.8 to 11.5. But there was very little changes in the hard wheat, or the bread flour producers, in the ending stocks. So not much impact on wheat prices. But corn's a different situation. They lowered the corn production from 45.1 billion bushels down to 44.6. They lowered the ending stocks from 11.5 billion bushels to 11.2. Now that's world. On the United States, they lowered it from 14.5 to 14.2. Ending stocks from 1.7 to 1.6. Remember last year we were over 2 billion bushels ending stocks. Ending stocks in soybeans down to 140 million bushels. You know, it's 909 million. In 18, it's 525 million in 19. I mean, that is tight. Soybean stocks, and as you could guess, soybean prices took off like a scalded dog.
With all that WASDE information, did that impact the forward contract prices?
To a certain degree. It didn't do very much to wheat. It changed a couple cents here and there. But corn, in the next couple hours after the report, increased 33 cents from $4.25 in Medford, Oklahoma to $4.58. Soybeans increased 21 cents from $10.81 to $11.02. Corn was stalled out a little bit on their upward trend, broke out the top on that, and beans just kept running. Cotton prices went up from about 79.5 cents to 81 cents. So some good price moves in corn, soybeans, and cotton.
Now to jump back to what you were talking about with Russia, the export tax, that seems like some pretty good news for Oklahoma wheat prices, but will that actually impact the price of wheat in any of those places?
Oh yeah, it's raised the world price of wheat. We got about 40 cents down on that 25. We may get another 60 or cents or so on this last, but Putin is disappointed. He wanted to essentially cap his wheat price. But what happened when he said we're going to put a tax on, that increased the demand for other countries, raised their price, and raised the Russian price. So he's not getting that full 82 cents or $1.60. He's maybe getting half or a third of it.
Let's look forward to, say, June. You know, June's only a couple months away now. It's weird saying that. But as we look at June, what do you think wheat prices will be in Oklahoma?
When we get to June and the wheat gets to the elevator, I'll tell you what the price is. Remember that a number by itself has no value. But a number, say, the forward contract price of $5.80 for wheat. What does that mean? Well, if your break-even's $4.75, that means you got $1.10. If it was $4.80 last year and it's $5.80 this year, that's another $1. You've got the opportunity to calculate and see what that means to you, whether or not you're making money. So I think these forward contract prices give us some potential to lock in some profit. The uncertainties are production, so I wouldn't get crazy with it, but I think I would take a little bit of it just in case it did go in the tank later on.
Okay, well, we'll let you get back to screaming out the good news. Okay, Dr. Kim Anderson, Grain Marketing Specialist here at Oklahoma State University.
So the first round of PPP was quite successful. It was able to employ 51 million Americans. 15% of those PPP loans went to small businesses, specifically in rural communities. So now we have a second round of PPP that's happening, and that includes $254 billion. The rollout is structured to address potential issues related to the ability of minority, underrepresented, veteran, and women businesses accessing capital. So just a quick reminder about eligibility for PPP. You can be a small business, an independent contractor, a sole proprietor, so you can be any of those different things. A couple rules is that you must employ less than 500 people in most cases, and you have to have been in business February 15th of 2020. So if you're planning to go to your lender, a few documents that you need to have: if you have employees, you need to have your payroll records. You also need to have the Form 1099 MISC and your Schedule C or F. If you do not have employees and you're a sole proprietorship, you need to have your income and your expense records as well as your bank records. So for farmers, if you're interested in a PPP loan, go ahead and get your documents together and talk to your lender and start working on that paperwork so that you're ready to get in line when that portal opens.
Finally, today we revisit a Sunup Favorite, taking a look at the vital role that Oklahoma plays in the migration of birds. Sunup's Curtis Hare takes us to Muskogee County.
What we see going on in January and February, we start getting a lot of wintering waterfowl, lots of geese, Canada geese, snow geese. We get a wide variety of ducks that are wintering here in central Oklahoma.
Waterfowl numbers fluctuate based on a number of factors, but the main one is weather.
We may not see very many birds come down here because weather conditions north of here are good for the birds, and there's no need for them to go farther south to avoid harsh winter conditions. And when they come here, they have ample amounts of food resources, lots of open water, so we get waste grain from cornfields, sorghum, this wheat field here that the geese will be feeding on. And
many Oklahoma grain producers are familiar with these tourists, which has not always been the case.
What we've seen over probably the last 50 years or so is that waterfowl, and especially geese, have taken advantage of agricultural crops. Snow geese numbers that have probably reached all-time highs. We've never seen the kind of numbers we have snow geese, and that is directly related to the fact that they've taken advantage of these agricultural crops. Same thing with a lot of our Canada geese.
Naturally, some producers view these birds as free-loading nuisances rather than friendly visitors, but there are some positives.
Certainly there are positive aspects of having geese here. For example, if you're a producer that's interested in making some additional money in sort of a waste grain field, so if you have a cornfield that's been harvested or sorghum, you're attracting geese. A lot of producers now will lease out that land to hunters, and so that's additional money in their pocket.
Wintering waterfowl are also popular for public viewing, and management areas like the Sequoia National Wildlife Refuge in eastern Oklahoma help encourage and protect waterfowl and other migrating birds.
So a lot of the birds, what we're kind of known for and what we were established for is waterfowl and water birds. So a lot of these birds are traveling down the Central Flyway.
Deputy Refuge Manager Damon Taylor says Oklahoma plays a vital role in the life cycle of migratory birds.
Oklahoma falls kind of right in the middle of the Central Flyway. You get to the grasslands out in the west is very important for sandhill cranes, whooping cranes. A lot of geese use that type of area, as well as shorebirds. Very important shorebird habitat all throughout the state. The wetlands, like the one you see behind me here, are very important. A lot of people may kind of overlook the importance, but they have just as much of a nutrient impact on a bird or any other type of wildlife's diet as any other type of vegetation, such as agricultural fields.
While the winter months are a good opportunity to see waterfowl, the peak movements for other migratory birds such as shorebirds is in the spring and early summer. I'm Curtis Hare.
That'll do it for us this week. Remember, you can find us anytime online at sunup.okstate.edu and also follow us on YouTube and social media. I'm Lyndall Stout. Have a great week, everyone, and remember, Oklahoma agriculture starts at sunup.